please. Good to see you, mate. He's been a developer in the central city over the last 30 years and would like to convey his thanks to the council and staff for their work and support. Okay.
Might stand up if you don't mind. I don't need to speak. Everyone can hear me. My name's Grant McKinnon. I've been a residential property developer in central Christchurch since 91 or soon after. I've done mostly apartments. I've also done a couple of apartment buildings out in Sumner and recently a project in New Brighton. I've come along this morning because I want to acknowledge and thank the council for their role and for the efforts in what I've done over the last 30 years. It's been no small task which you guys take on, and the staff especially. I'm taking a break. The last few years have been a bit of a roller coaster, and I may well come back. If I don't, my daughter Sky may well in my place. I've got some thoughts and observations I'd like to share as well as the thanks. When I first got started, there was still a bit of a hangover from the 1980s boom. So it goes a wee way back. Through the 1990s and the 2000s, it was pretty tough in the central city. There were a couple of cycles which came and went, and as with each cycle that comes along and each boom, you get cowboys come out of the woodwork and give property development a go. They get donged on the head and end up disappearing and leaving a mess. It's sometimes a bit tough to take for those of us who try and stay in it over the long term. And then in 2007, of course, we had the global financial crisis, which was very tough on me personally. And that's where the banks failed. Fortunately for them, they got saved. People like me got hung out to dry. It was a tough time. Managed to get through it. It took a while, just in time for the earthquakes to come along. So all of my buildings except for one managed to stay up, which was great, and nobody in any of my buildings got hurt, which was even better. After the earthquakes, of course, we had the rebuild time, which was a very active time for council and for the councillors and also the staff, of course, and a few of us developers who tried to get residential going in the central city during that time. That was also pretty tough. And then, of course, we went into what I've noted here as the crazy COVID times and the boom which came along just a couple of years ago as part of that. Those cycles never really help anyone. They actually just make it harder for people like myself. The best thing you can have for a developer is just a consistent market all the way through. When it goes up and down, it creates distortions and can be very difficult to operate in. I've always operated by a couple of basic principles. The first one is that as a developer, the living environment that we're creating is the very first thing that we have to get right. Some of my colleagues tend to develop on the basis of the numbers. They are equally as important, but they always come second. The very first thing that a developer should do is concentrate on making a very good living environment, because that's what we do. People come home, they rest their heads at night and sleep, and they relax, they get up in the morning. You have to create a good living environment. If you put the numbers first, you end up making mistakes. You might end up with a bedroom without a window or some other feature which just turns people off. So the numbers must come second. They're equally as important, but they must come second. Another principle I've operated by is that great architecture has significant benefits to the people that live in the development, the people in the immediate locality, and for the wider city as well. One thing I am proud of is that 3 of my projects won architecture awards. They were the Gallery Apartments, Rakaya Apartments in Kilmore Street, and recently the Riverbank Quarter over on the corner of Manchester and Cambridge Terrace. One of the other principles I've always worked by is that I'll only build what I'm happy to live in myself. At least then I get it right for one person. A few other comments. I've often heard over the years that central city living in Christchurch is something new and the population isn't used to it. That's not right. The central city living in Christchurch is the oldest living in Christchurch, and that goes back to Maori as well. They lived at the top of the tide, which was over near Fitzgerald Ave, And when the English and other Europeans arrived, they also lived in the same area, and they've stayed living here ever since. So it's actually the oldest established suburb, if you like, in the city. Before the earthquakes, there were about 8,000 people living in the central city. It was a very strong, well-established population. A small market for people like me to work in, but it was strong and established, and it worked reasonably well. Post-earthquake, or during the earthquakes, of course, that population, which was a little bit older, got dispersed, and unfortunately they haven't come back. But there is a new generation of inhabitants in the central city, and you'll see that solidify over time, I'm sure, and it will build. I think the city, in terms of residential population in the central city, is a really good position at the moment. There is also a new generation of developers and business people active in the city as well. People that were active before the earthquakes have either stopped, or perhaps they worked through the rebuild and have stopped now. So it's interesting. There's a whole new generation of developers that are active. You'll be aware of some of them, I'm sure. One thing I'd like to comment on is the Development's Contribution Rebate Scheme, which was put in place during the rebuild. That really helped. I came in here and presented on a couple of occasions on that. And there was at one point it was at risk of being cancelled while there were still some funds available, and I implored council to extend it just for a little bit further to keep the momentum going. During the first part of the rebuild, there were actually less than a handful of residential developers active in the central city. There was only a few of us, and we were struggling to get the momentum going, but we did, together with council. So you guys you need to be congratulated, and I applaud you for doing that. That did really help, and it got the momentum going, and now we've seen what's happened in the East Frame and other developments around the city. So well done. So give me 1 second. One thing you might be interested in this, I've been to a lot of council workshops, forums, meetings, all sorts over the years, and I've often been asked one particular question every single time, and I've always given the same answer. I get asked, what is the one thing council could do to help me as a developer in the central city? And I've always given the same answer, and that's amenity, street amenity. When I've finished a building, if you guys could come along and reseal the footpath in front and plant a couple of trees, that would do it. If you can just plant trees in all the streets and improve the footpath so that when people come home at the end of the day, they turn into their street and it's welcoming. Street amenity is the thing. So with those few comments, I would like to acknowledge the role that council has taken in residential development. You're a creation of central government, of course, and at times I feel sorry for you because you always get dumped with all sorts of things that you have to deal with from central government, and you have to deal with it with what I consider an antiquated funding system called rates. So good luck to you. I don't know how you do it. I'd also like to acknowledge the work that you do in monitoring and supervising the building code. Now, of course, you get developers like me squeal and squawk all the time when we're trying to get our code compliance certificates or a Section 224 certificate for subdivision consents. But it's very important that the building code and basic standards are monitored and maintained so that the public has confidence. If the public and my buyers don't have confidence, then I can't operate. It's a crucial role, so thank you. I acknowledge the work that you do there. If that's not done, of course, you end up with things like leaky homes. I'd also like to acknowledge the professionalism of council staff. I've dealt with a lot of them over the years. I don't know too many at the moment, well, less at the moment, but I've known a lot of them over the years. They've been very professional. I've always, most of the time, take the phone call and come back and answer the questions. It's probably best illustrated by an anecdote. When I first started, I was in my early 20s, you can tend to get a little more emotional at times if things are a bit frustrating. And at times I've squawked myself, and I've perhaps bitten a little bit harder than I should have. That has never been responded to in kind. So if I've bitten, it's never come back to me, and I'd like to really acknowledge that particular point. Very professional and most appreciated. So I'd like to give thanks to all the staff, too many to name. There are lots and lots of them in building and subdivision and planning and transport and water and drainage and at the administration, and to the councillors, to you councillors out here. I've presented to you many times over the years and you always listen and I think take on board what I say. So I appreciate that. One last point, there's been one organisation that has been consistent in all my projects for the last 30 years, and that's you, council. There's been banks come and go, builders come and go, architects come and go, and engineers, but it's one organisation that's been with me on every single project, and it's the council. And it's worked well, it's been fun, believe it or not. I enjoy what I do and have done. It's a real challenge, and I actually don't mind it when council says, well, you can't do that. I don't mind a challenge, but you guys have been consistent all the way through. So I just say thank you, and I sincerely appreciate your efforts. That's it.
I'd just like to say thank you to Grant. I could listen to you all day talking like that. It's a welcome change to some things that come in here, but taking the time to come in and say that. And thanks so much for your passion and contribution to the city over the years, and all the best for the future. Thank you. Okay, we have no deputations or petitions today. So before moving into our staff reports, can I please get a mover and seconder to include the supplementary items 12 and 13? That's Councillor Cotter and Councillor Henstock. Thank you. Which 12 is the draft submission, Canterbury Regional Land Transport Plan, and number 13, the Mayor's Report. Right, so... Oh, and I voted. Yeah, all those in favour? Against? Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Katie. Couldn't do without... Everyone needs a Katie. Right, so in my Mayor's Report. Bringing this report to you today, just to say